Ironmoor Basin, the 10th month of the 15th year after the second reading of the peace. Ronan Kade almost drove past her. He had been pushing the gelding hard since the storm broke properly at 4, leaning into the rain with the specific resolve of a man who had 2 miles left between himself and a dry barn, and intended to cover them. The road had turned to the kind of Ironmoor mud that pulled at the wagon wheels with every rotation. The rain came sideways, and then straight down, and then sideways again, and the light had gone out of the sky an hour earlier than the 9th month would have allowed. He was cold in the specific way of a man wearing wool that had stopped being wool 3 miles back and was now only a heavy shape sitting against his skin. He saw her in his side vision, a shape at the edge of the road that was wrong for the landscape, too upright for a fence post, too small for a tree, too still for a running animal. He pulled the gelding to a stop. He turned. A woman was standing at the roadside with her back partly to the wind, bent slightly forward in the posture of someone who had been walking against weather for a long time and had stopped pretending it was temporary. She was wearing a dark blue wool dress soaked through so completely it provided nothing. Her hair was black and heavy with rain and plastered to her face. Her boots were caked with mud past the ankle. She was holding something against her chest, something wrapped in a gray woven blanket, curled around it with both arms in the specific posture of a woman who had made herself into a shelter. She was, unmistakably to any eye that had been raised in the basin, orc, the soft green-gray undertone of the skin at her wrist and along her jaw. The 2 small lower tusks visible at the corner of her mouth closed hard against the cold. She was young, very young. Ronan set the brake. He leaned over the side of the wagon. "Miss," he said. She looked up. Her face was drawn from cold and exhaustion. Her eyes were amber and dark in the rain, and they were doing 2 things at once, assessing him with the careful attention of a woman alone on a road with a child, and not quite concealing the tiredness underneath. "I am fine," she said. This was not true in any observable way. "You are soaked through, and the light is going," Ronan said. "The temperature is dropping. That will freeze past sundown." She looked at the wagon. She looked at him. She looked at the road ahead, which disappeared into rain and offered nothing. The blanket against her chest moved. "Is that a child?" he said. "My daughter," she said. "She is fine." Ronan looked at this orc woman standing in an Ironmoor rain, holding a small child against her chest as if she were the last shelter left standing between her daughter and the weather. He thought about his father, who had died 6 years ago, and who had told him more than once, in a voice that had not been raised for the saying of it, "You stop for people on the road, Ronan, you stop, and you help, and you do not ask them to explain themselves first." He thought about the temperature and the 6 miles of open valley south of them and the shape wrapped in the gray blanket that had moved. He slid over on the bench. "Get up," he said. She looked at him. "You do not know me," she said. "I know it is getting dark," he said. "I know it is getting cold. I know you have a baby." He held her gaze through the rain. "Plainly, my name is Ronan Kade. My ranch is 2 miles south. I have a barn and a house and a fire." She was deciding something. He could see it. Whatever she was carrying was making the arithmetic take longer than just weather and distance. She looked at the road ahead. She looked at the sky, which had made its own decision an hour before. She looked at whatever conclusion the calculation arrived at. "May we sleep in your barn," she said. He held out his hand. "You can sleep in the house," he said. She took his hand. He pulled her up onto the bench beside him. She settled the wet blanket in her lap with the specific care of a person handling something that mattered more than her own arms did. Ronan clicked at the gelding, and the wagon moved south through the rain. He did not ask her name. She would give it, or she would not, and either way it was not something she owed him for the ride. He drove. She sat. The wagon rocked over the ruts. She did not shiver, though she should have been. She was holding herself in the specific way of a person who had learned that shivering wasted energy and did not warm you. After a mile, she said, quietly, "Yenra, Yenra," he said. "Yenra Vos," she said. "My daughter is Rue." "Rue," he said. He looked briefly at the blanket in her lap. How old? 4 months. He did not say anything to that. It seemed the sort of information a person offered only if they were prepared for it to lead somewhere, and he was not going to lead it anywhere without an invitation. They made the last mile in silence. The rain did not slack. The gelding knew the last stretch by heart and did not need much reining. Ronan brought the wagon into the yard, took it directly to the barn door, jumped down, and had the door open in the specific fast way of a man who had done this hundreds of times in weather worse than this. He came around to Yenra's side and held up his hands. "I will take her," he said, "just for the step down. You are cold enough that your legs will not do what you tell them." She looked at him for one long second. Then she handed him the blanket. Rue was small and warm inside her wrappings, and Ronan held her for the 15 seconds it took to get Yenra down from the box, and understood in those 15 seconds that he was holding something whose weight he had not held in 3 years, and had not been prepared to hold today, and which the body did not forget. He handed her back the moment Yenra's feet were on the ground. Yenra took her without comment. They went inside. The Kade ranch house had been built for 2 people and occupied by 1 for 3 years. This was visible in the way that empty spaces became visible, not in disrepair, because Ronan was not a man who let things fall apart, but in the particular blankness of a place maintained without being inhabited. The kitchen table had 1 chair pulled out. The 2 hooks by the door had 1 coat on them. The shelf above the fireplace had a small painted wooden panel of an aspen grove on the left, and a space beside it where a second panel had been and was no longer. Yenra noticed all of this in the first 30 seconds. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, efficiently, filing the information, building a picture. The man who had picked her up was a widower. He was not wealthy, but he was not poor. The house was solid, the windows intact and recently cleaned. He kept the place the way a person kept a thing they respected but no longer loved. She also noticed the cradle in the corner of the main room pushed back against the wall, slightly dusty in the specific way of something put aside rather than forgotten. It was made of pale ash wood. It was small, built for a newborn. It had never held a child in any visible way. She did not ask about it. But before the week was over, she understood, without needing to be told, that Ronan Kade was going to be asked at some point to tell her why it had never held one, and that when the asking came, she was going to have to be careful about it. Ronan went to the kitchen almost immediately, moving with the efficiency of a man who needed the activity. Yenra went to the spare room he indicated. It was clean, clearly unused, but ready in the specific way of a room in a house kept by a man who did not anticipate guests, but did not want to be caught unprepared if any arrived. She laid Rue on the bed and unwrapped the wet gray blanket. The baby looked up at her with the wide, focused attention that 4-month-olds gave to everything. Apparently unconcerned by the storm or the strange room, or the hour, or the smell of a man's soap on the pillow beneath her. "You," Yenra said quietly, "are entirely too calm about this." Rue considered this and decided to be satisfied with her situation. Yenra changed her into the 1 dry set of clothes she had managed to keep dry in the inner oilcloth pocket of her satchel, which was the one thing she had done right in the packing at Blackspire Junction 6 days ago, and wrapped her in the dry linen blanket she had also kept in the oilcloth, and for the first time in 6 days of railcar and stagecoach and muddy road felt the specific relief of a person who had been moving and had at last stopped. She allowed herself 1 full minute of it. Then she heard Ronan in the kitchen, and she thought about a man who had not asked a single question and had held out his hand in the rain, and she got up. She was going to go and help with whatever needed helping with, because that was the only honest currency she had left. Ronan was at the stove when she came into the kitchen. He had put a kettle on. He had opened the icebox. He had a small pot of what looked like the previous day's beef stock on the counter and was assembling something with the ease of a person who cooked for himself every day and had stopped noticing that it was work. Yenra appeared in the doorway with Rue balanced on her left hip, her hair still damp but combed back off her face. Wearing the one dry gray wool dress she had kept folded at the bottom of the satchel for weather she had not anticipated but had planned for anyway. She stood in the doorway a moment and did the same efficient inventory of the kitchen that she had done of the main room. The pantry, she noted, had been organized by a person who understood ranching but not provisioning. She filed this. The stove was clean. The cast iron on the pegs was seasoned. Whoever had first taught this house to cook had cared about how. "Can I help?" she said. "It is soup," Ronan said. "It does not require two. Everything requires two," Yenra said. "One to stir and one to watch the bread." He looked at the heel of yesterday's bread sitting on the counter. He handed it to her. She sliced it thin and set it near the heat with the specific ease of a person who had been doing this in kitchens since she was tall enough to reach the counter. She stood at the corner of the counter with Rue balanced on her left hip, the one-arm economy of a new mother 4 months into the arrangement, and went on with the small work. "You live alone," she said. "Yes, how long?" He stirred the pot. 3 years. She did not ask what had changed 3 years ago. She had seen the cradle. She only said, quietly, "I am sorry." He looked at the pot. "Thank you," he said. They ate at the kitchen table. He brought a second chair over from the corner where it had been sitting since he had moved it out of the way 3 years ago. It fit at the table exactly. It had, of course, been made for the table. The rain was loud against the windows. The fire in the small stove behind them was warm. Rue sat in Yenra's lap and looked at Ronan with the comprehensive attention of a baby encountering a new face. He looked back at her carefully, the way a man who had learned to be cautious about things that required him to feel something looked at a small person who was going to require him to feel something whether he had planned to or not. Rue was 4 months old and had a fine head of reddish-dark hair coming in above a soft green-tinted face. The small hard nubs of 2 lower tusks that would come in her 7th year detectable at the corner of her mouth when she opened it to breathe. Her eyes were working their way toward some color that had not yet decided. "She is looking at you," Yenra said. "I see that. It means she has decided you are interesting," Yenra said. "She does not look at people who bore her." Ronan glanced at Yenra, then back at Rue. Rue was still looking at him with the small, serious frown of a person conducting an assessment. "What is the verdict?" he said. "She has not yet ruled," Yenra said. "She takes her time." Ronan almost smiled. He did not, quite, but it was close. Yenra saw it start and start again, and she filed that too. They did not talk about anything much through the meal. He asked her, at one point, where she had been walking from. She said, from a stagecoach that had let a wagon share go 2 days east of Deepford. She did not name the town. He did not press. He asked her whether she had eaten today. She said, at Deepford, this morning. He set another slice of the bread near her hand without commenting. After the meal, she cleared her plate to the sink and washed it and left it in the drying rack. She stood at the sink for a moment with her back to him. "I would like to say," she said, "that we will be gone in the morning. Only I do not know that is true. If the rain does not slack and the road is still what it is at first light, we may need 1 more day. If that is a problem, tell me now, and I will find a way." "It is not a problem," Ronan said. "The rain will not slack by morning. That storm has 3 days of rain in it if I know an Ironmoor sky. You will stay until the road is dry enough for a wagon, at the earliest." She turned. "Are you sure?" He looked at her plainly. "I have a house. I have a barn. I have 3 years of stored feed. I have not had a guest since my father's cousin came out 2 summers ago to look at the property line. This is not going to be an inconvenience to me. It may be an inconvenience to you, and you should decide about that on your own, but not the other way around." Yenra held his gaze a moment. She nodded. "Thank you," she said. She did not thank him a second time. She did not need to. She took Rue and went to the spare room and closed the door behind her, and lay down on the narrow bed with the baby in the crook of her arm and stared at the ceiling in the specific way of a person whose body has finally stopped moving and whose mind has not yet caught up. She slept, eventually, deeper than she had slept in a week. Ronan sat at the kitchen table another hour before he banked the fire. He thought about a woman on a road in the rain. He thought about a hand held out. He thought about the cradle in the corner of the main room. He did not, for the first time in some months, think about any of these things in the specific bitter way he had grown accustomed to thinking about them. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but he did not sleep badly either. He slept, and that was more than he usually did on nights when he had opened the front room and been forced to look at the cradle in the corner. The rain did not slack the next day. Or the next. It slacked on the 4th day, and by the 6th the road might have carried a wagon if the wagon was one Ronan trusted more than the one he owned. He did not raise the question of the road on the 6th day. Neither did Yenra. It was not by then entirely clear that the road was the question. Yenra had, in those first 4 days, put the pantry in the order she had known from the first evening it should have been in. She had done it without asking, and Ronan had not asked her to stop. Because he had come into the kitchen on the 2nd morning to find the flour and the salt and the coffee within 1 motion of the stove instead of 3, and had understood without commenting that a person had reorganized his kitchen for the specific efficiency of a person who was going to be using it, and had understood without commenting on that either that this was a thing he was going to allow to happen. She fed Rue on a schedule that had the small internal rhythm of a mother who had figured out her child, and she nursed sitting in the chair beside the front room window in the mornings while Ronan was already out at the barn, and she did not apologize for occupying the room in the way a nursing mother occupied a room. Ronan came in for coffee on the 2nd morning and saw her, and turned around and went back out to the barn, and came in for coffee an hour later after she was done and Rue was asleep against her shoulder in the woven wrap Yenra had put together out of a spare bolt of linen he had left on the pantry shelf. He did not remark on the wrap. She did not ask permission to have used the linen. Both of them understood, without needing to say so, what had been the honest exchange. On the 3rd day, Rue had cried through most of the morning, in the specific, fussy way of a baby who was too small to have language for what was wrong, and was also very sure something was wrong. Yenra had walked her, and sung to her in a low language Ronan did not entirely recognize but understood the shape of, and had eventually gotten her down for a nap that lasted 45 minutes and was then over. Ronan had come in for the midday meal to find Yenra at the kitchen table cutting up a small piece of the softer cheese from the icebox for Rue to gum on, and Rue's face flushed pink and unhappy, and Yenra's own face composed and tired. "Teething," Yenra said without looking up. "Early. 4 months is early for a first tooth." Ronan looked at Rue. He looked at Yenra. He said, "There is a small piece of ivory in the top drawer of the desk in the front room. It was mine when I was little. My mother kept it. She thought I would want it one day." Yenra looked at him then. "You are welcome to it," he said. "It is smoothed. It is clean. It is the right size for a mouth that small. My mother, if she were here, would tell you to boil it once in the kettle for a minute and then let it cool. That is what she did for my nephew when he came through here as a baby. I do not have a use for it." Yenra held his gaze a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." She went and found it. She boiled it. She let it cool. She gave it to Rue. Rue accepted it with the enormous relief of a baby whose entire day had been leading up to the moment someone finally gave her something appropriate to bite, and she fell asleep against Yenra's shoulder with the small ivory disc still clenched in her fist within 20 minutes, and slept an hour and a half. Yenra sat in the front room chair through that hour and a half without moving, though she could have laid Rue down after the first 30 minutes, and Rue would have kept sleeping. She had learned in the 6 days on the road not to give up an hour of a sleeping baby to convenience. Ronan came in from the barn at the tail end of it. He saw Yenra in the chair. He saw the small ivory disc in Rue's fist. He did not say anything. He crossed the room to the kitchen quietly. He put water on for coffee. He came back to the doorway of the front room with 2 cups and set one on the small table beside Yenra's elbow without disturbing her, and stood in the doorway with his own, and looked at her for a moment. "You are quiet on your feet," she said, without opening her eyes. "I have been walking around a sleeping horse since I was 4, he said. "It carries over." She smiled without opening her eyes. It was small and tired and real. Ronan saw it happen. He filed it, the way she had filed most things, without knowing he was doing it. Then he went out to the porch to drink his coffee, because the front room, with Yenra and Rue in it and the ivory disc and the sleeping and the small quiet, was suddenly a room he could not stand at the doorway of without doing something with what he was feeling that he was not yet ready to do. He drank his coffee on the porch in the after-rain sun of a 4th day, and thought about how much space there was to fill in the arithmetic of a life, and how quickly a person could be knocked off the balance they had spent 3 years finding, and how, oddly, this did not feel like being knocked off balance at all. It felt like being reminded that balance had never been the point. Edgar Holt rode into the yard on the 6th morning. Ronan saw him from the barn and stepped out to meet him without hurrying, because Edgar Holt was a man who did not require hurrying and did not respect it if you gave it to him. Edgar was 57 years old, human, tall, thin as fence wire, and hard as the same, with iron-gray hair cut short and a face that had known too much sun. He had been Ronan's father-in-law for the 4 years Ronan had been married to his daughter Lys, and had been Ronan's father-in-law for 3 years after Lys had passed, because that was not the sort of arrangement a man like Edgar Holt considered dissolved by a death. He came around the ranch every few weeks. He did not announce his visits. He was welcome, and he knew he was welcome, and so he did not observe the specific ceremonies of announcement that other men in the basin might have observed. He swung down off his horse. He looked at Ronan. "You have a strange wagon in your barn," he said. "Not so strange," Ronan said. "Only new." Edgar looked at him. "I will tell you," Ronan said. "Come inside." They went inside. Yenra was at the kitchen table sorting through a small pile of buttons Ronan had asked her to sort for the mending pile the night before. Rue was on the floor beside her chair on a folded quilt, chewing on the ivory disc. Yenra looked up when the 2 men came in. She saw Edgar. She saw the way Ronan was standing beside him. She stood up, calmly, and moved to the counter with the specific composure of a woman who understood that she was about to be examined by a person who had a right to examine her, and had decided in advance that she would let the examination happen without flinching. Edgar looked at her a long moment. He looked at Rue on the quilt. He looked back at Ronan. Ronan told him. Short version. He had picked her up on the road in the rain 6 evenings ago. She had a baby. The storm had shut the road for 4 days. He had told her she could stay till the road was fit for a wagon. It was fit now, and he had not raised the question of her leaving, and neither had she. Edgar listened without moving. When Ronan finished, Edgar was quiet for a stretch. Then Edgar said to Yenra, "What is your name, ma'am?" "Yenra Vos," she said. "Where were you going before the storm caught you?" "Silverfoot Landing," she said. "My mother's cousin has a house there. She wrote to me 2 winters ago that if I ever needed a place I would have one. I have not seen her since I was 8. I do not know if she is still there. But that was where I was going." Edgar nodded slowly. "And how did you come to be walking on that road in the 9th month with a 4-month-old baby?" Yenra held his gaze. "I lost my situation at Blackspire Junction in the 7th month," she said. "The kitchen I had worked in for 2 years closed when its owner went east. I had a small amount saved. It ran through. Rue's father had made a promise he did not keep. I made the decision to go west to my mother's cousins rather than stay in a town that did not have work for me and would not have work for me before the winter. I bought a stagecoach ticket for as far as it would carry me. I bought passage on a wagon share from there. That wagon share put me off at a crossroads 2 mornings before Mr. Kade found me. I walked from there. That is the whole of it." Edgar Holt looked at her a long moment. Yenra did not look away. "The baby's father," Edgar said. "Where is he?" Yenra's face did not change. "He is at the end of a survey line somewhere between Blackspire Junction and the coast," she said. "That was the direction he was walking when I last had a letter from him. That was 4 months ago. Rue was 10 days old. He has not written since. I do not expect him to. Are you married to him?" "No," she said. "He said we would be. We were not. Are you looking for him?" "No," she said. Edgar nodded once. He looked at Ronan. "May I sit down?" Edgar said. "Of course you can sit down," Ronan said. Edgar sat at the kitchen table across from where Yenra had been sitting. He looked at Rue on the quilt. Rue had stopped chewing the ivory disc and was watching Edgar with the specific full attention of a baby encountering a new face and deciding, in her own time, what she thought about it. "She is looking at you," Yenra said. "I see that," Edgar said. "She will decide about you in her own time," Yenra said. "Do not try to hurry her." Edgar did not smile. He was not a man who smiled with his mouth, but something in his eyes eased fractionally. And Ronan, who had known him for 8 years, saw the ease arrive. Edgar looked at Ronan. "Your father," Edgar said, "told me once that he taught you to stop for people on the road. He was proud of that. He told me you would keep doing it after he was gone. I did not think this is what he meant, but I do not know why I did not. This is exactly what he meant." Ronan did not say anything. "The road is fit for a wagon," Edgar said, still looking at Ronan. "I passed it coming up. Whatever the 2 of you have decided about that is not my business. But I will say this. My daughter would not have wanted this house left empty on account of what happened to her. She would not have wanted the cradle in the corner to sit empty forever either. She said as much, more than once in her last 2 months, in the specific way she said things, which was as if she had already thought it through and was just letting me catch up. I have carried those 2 thoughts around for 3 years without knowing what to do with them. I am telling them to you now because it seems the correct time." Ronan looked at Edgar. Edgar looked back at him plainly. "I am not telling you what to do," Edgar said. "I am telling you what she said. What you do about it is your business. But if you keep going the way you have been going, alone in this house, on the strength of what you thought you owed her memory, you are going to end up doing the opposite of what she asked for. I will not stand quiet and watch you do that any longer." He looked at Yenra. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said. "This was not a conversation to have in front of you. Only I have been carrying it a long time, and it seemed like the moment." Yenra nodded once. "It is all right," she said. Edgar looked at Rue. Rue had made her decision about him. She kicked her small feet once against the quilt and made the quiet particular noise of a baby who had approved of a stranger. Edgar reached down and touched the top of her head with one large weathered hand. He looked back at Ronan. "I will go," he said. "I did not ride out here for this. I rode out here to ask you if I could borrow the small plow next week, and I forgot to ask." "Take it whenever you need it," Ronan said. "I do not have plans for it." Edgar stood up. He looked at Yenra a last time. "You are welcome in this basin, ma'am," Edgar said. "You are welcome in this house. I will not be the last person you meet in this valley, but I will be one of the first. And I am telling you now, so that when the others come, you have this to hold against whatever some of them may say. My name is Edgar Halt. I was Ronan Kade's father-in-law. I still am. Anyone who has trouble with your presence in this house has trouble with me, and I will tell them so. In writing, if it comes to it." "Thank you," Yenra said. Her voice was steady, but the corner of her mouth had done a small thing before she got it under control. Edgar nodded once. He touched the brim of his hat to her. He went out. Ronan followed him to the yard. They stood at the horse a moment. "I did not expect that," Ronan said quietly. "Neither did I," Edgar said. "But I saw the two of you in the kitchen. I saw the baby on the quilt. I saw the way she looked at me. That is enough for a first visit. The rest we will see." He swung up. "You know what your father would say," Edgar said, looking down at Ronan. "I know. You are already doing it," Edgar said. "Do not talk yourself out of it now." He rode. Ronan stood in the yard until Edgar was around the bend. Then he went back inside. Yenra was at the counter, her back to him, both hands flat against the wood. Her shoulders were doing the specific slow work of a person who had been holding something very tight and had just been given permission to let a piece of it go. He did not go to her. He did not touch her shoulder. He said, quietly from the doorway, he meant every word of that. "I know," she said, without turning around. She stood a moment longer. Then she straightened. She turned. Her face was composed. Her eyes were wet, but she had not cried, and she was not going to cry, and she was, he understood, telling him that with the specific set of her jaw. He would like to see her again, she said. "Rue, she is going to remember him. I have been paying attention. She remembers faces at 4 months. That is the age she starts. He will come back," Ronan said. "I do not think we will have to wait long." Yenra nodded. She went to the quilt. She picked Rue up. She held her a moment against her shoulder. Rue reached with one small hand and closed it around a piece of Yenra's hair and pulled once, weakly, and did not let go. "That is her sign for something," Yenra said. "I have not figured out what yet, but she does it when she is content." Ronan looked at the two of them. He did not say anything. He went to put the kettle on. "Before we go on, one small thing. If this story is finding you somewhere warm tonight, do me a favor. Write in the comments which town the winter finds you in. Not the big one you drive to on the weekend. The little one where the porch light stays on. I want to see the map of you. Now, back to a ranch house on the Ironmoor, and a father-in-law riding home with something loose in his chest for the first time in 3 years. The days after Edgar's visit shifted, though neither of them named the shift. Ronan did not raise the road again. Yenra did not either. She went on organizing what needed organizing, and moved from the pantry to the linen chest to the herb bundles hanging in the pantry corner from what had been a good year's growing 3 years ago and had not been touched since. She sorted the herbs by what was still good and what was no longer worth the space, and put back only what she meant to use, and Ronan came in for his supper on the 8th day and found the pantry smelling like a house being lived in for the first time in 3 years, and did not say anything. The 9th day was a Sunday. Neither of them observed a Sabbath in any formal way. But the 9th day was quieter than the others, and both of them knew it, and both of them let it be what it was. Yenra was on the porch in the late afternoon of that day with Rue asleep against her shoulder. Ronan came up the porch step from the yard. He sat on the second step, one below her, the way he had sat that first porch conversation night, and did not look at her directly. "May I tell you something?" he said. "Please," she said. He was quiet a moment. "Her name was Liz," he said. "I met her at Deepford when I was 26, and she was 22. Her father, Edgar, had brought her in from Silverfoot Landing that year to nurse her mother, who had gone deaf and needed help and did not know how to ask for it. Liz stayed with her mother for 8 months. Her mother died in the 3rd month of that year, and Liz stayed on another 2 months to help Edgar with the parts of a house neither of them had known how to keep. I was in Deepford on a lumber order the day she was buying flour at the Mercantile, and I made a fool of myself in the specific quiet way I sometimes did, and she took pity on me and let me pretend it had been on purpose, which was the whole of our beginning. Yenra did not say anything. She only shifted Rue slightly against her shoulder to keep her comfortable and listened. We were married the following spring, Ronan said. She was my wife for 4 years. She managed this ranch better than I did, in the specific way of a woman who understood accounts and understood animals and understood the small politics of the basin. And I did the outer work and she did the inner work, and it was, I think, as fair an arrangement as any 2 people I have ever known. He paused. She was carrying our first child in the 4th year. She had wanted a child for a long time. It had not come. When it came, we were both, I think, more careful about it than either of us admitted to each other. She was healthy through the first 6 months. She was healthy through the 7th. The 8th month started badly. I sent for the midwife at Deepford. She came. It was already too far along by the time she got here. Luce was in labor for a day and a half. The child was a boy. He was too small. He lived 4 hours. She lived 12 more, and then she did not. He was quiet a moment. His name was Wynn, he said. Liz had wanted to name him after her grandfather, who had built the first proper house at Silverfoot Landing. We had been calling the child Wynn between us for 2 months by then, because Liz said it would be strange to bring him out of her body without a name to hand him. She held him the 4 hours. I held him after she passed. Edgar came the next morning. He held him too. We buried them together the day after, up on the small rise east of the barn. There is a stone. I keep the grass off it. That is where we are. Yenra did not say anything for a long moment. Her hand had moved without her noticing to rest lightly against the back of Rue's head. The cradle in the front room, Ronan said, was one my father made in his last year. He gave it to Liz the winter she got the news the child had taken. He was already sick himself, and made it at the workbench in the barn without saying what he was doing until it was done. He gave it to Liz in the 7th month, and Liz wept, and thanked him, and put it in the corner where it is now, and it has not held a child, and I have not moved it out of that corner. And I have not covered it either, because covering it would have been a lie, and putting it in the barn would have been a different kind of lie, and taking it out to burn it would have been a lie about my own father as well as about Liz, and I did not know what else to do with it. So I left it. It has been 3 years. He looked out at the yard. I am telling you all of this, Ronan said, because you have been in this house 8 days now, and you have seen the cradle, and you have not asked, and I am not going to make you ask. And also because Edgar was right about the 2 things Liz said in her last 2 months. She said the house was not to be left empty. And she said the cradle was not to sit empty forever. I have not been ready to hear those 2 sentences from anyone else for 3 years. It appears I am ready to hear them now. He did not turn to look at Yenra. I am not asking you for anything, he said. I am not asking you to stay past the point when you decide you want to go, and I am not asking you to take on what lies asked. I am only telling you, so that you know it, and so that the cradle in the corner is not a thing you have to walk carefully around anymore, and so that if Rue ever wants to nap in it, which is the sort of thing a baby might want to do because a cradle is a cradle and a baby is a baby, you can put her in it without asking, because she is welcome in it, and I would be glad to see her there. Yenra was quiet a long time. When she spoke, her voice was low and careful. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded. "I will tell you one thing," she said. "I have not put Rue in your cradle because I did not know if it was allowed. She has slept in a wooden crate lined with your extra blanket for 8 nights, on the floor beside the spare room bed, because I did not want to ask. Now that you have said what you have said, I will put her in the cradle tonight. She will feel it well. She will sleep well in it. And I will not tell you what to feel about seeing her there, but I will tell you that Lies was correct. It is not a lie to let a cradle be what a cradle is." Ronan closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you," he said. They sat on the porch in the afterlight of the 9th day without saying anything else for a long while. Rue slept against Yenra's shoulder. The sky moved. The Ironmoor evening came down cool and clear. That night Yenra brought Rue into the front room from the spare room and laid her in the cradle in the corner. Rue fit as if the cradle had been waiting for her, which, Yenra thought without saying it, was probably the case. Ronan came in from the barn and stood a moment in the doorway of the front room and looked at Rue in the cradle and did not say anything. Yenra was in the kitchen. She did not turn around. She let him have the room for as long as he needed it. He stood in the doorway for a full minute. Then he crossed the front room to the small desk in the corner and sat down and opened the ledger and worked on it for an hour, with a small child asleep in a cradle 4 feet from his elbow for the first time in 3 years, and did the arithmetic he needed to do without missing a column. Yenra washed the supper dishes and went to bed. Ronan banked the fires. He looked at Rue in the cradle. He did not touch her. He went out to the barn to check the horses one last time. When he came back in, Rue had turned her head in her sleep so that she was facing the room. He stood by the cradle a moment, longer than he had planned to, and then he went to bed. He slept better that night than he had slept in some months. Yenra, in the spare room, heard him bank the fire and go out to the barn and come back in, and heard the door close on his own room, and lay awake for another 20 minutes thinking about a young rancher who had told her more in a single porch conversation than most people told other people in a year, and about her own father, who had told her nothing in the years before he passed, because he had not been that kind of man, and about the small child in the cradle in the next room, who had, in 8 days, opened 3 doors in 3 separate people whose doors had been closed for a very long time. Yenra Vos slept. She had not told Ronan the whole shape of it that first morning with Edgar Halt. She had told what needed telling. She had left out the pieces that would have been for her only, or for someone she trusted differently. But she thought about all of it, in the small dark hours after Ronan had gone to bed, because the porch conversation had opened something in her too, and there was not much to do with it except think. She had come to Blackspire Junction 3 years earlier. In the 12th year after the second reading of the piece, on the same wagon her mother's cousin Halda had traveled on the season before, from the last thinning orc hold on the north side of Ashgate Pass. The hold had gone from 12 families to 7 in the previous 4 years. Yenra was 21. Her mother had died in the 2nd month of that year, of the same lung illness that had taken her grandfather a decade before, and her father had gone quiet in a way that had told Yenra, without either of them naming it, that he was not going to make it another winter in that thinned-out place, and would not want her to make it there with him. She had gone south to Blackspire Junction because Blackspire was where the work was. Blackspire Junction was the crossroads where the northern Surveyor Road met the eastern railway line that had been extended through in the 11th year of the peace, and where the southern wagon route down to Silverfoot Landing began. It was not a town so much as a permanently temporary settlement. 120 buildings of raw pine that had been going up faster than anyone could name them for a decade, occupied by railway workers and wagon drivers and surveyors and cooks and washwomen and shopkeepers and the specific loose community of people who had all landed in the same place because the same set of circumstances had made them go. Yenra had gotten a job in a kitchen. It was a large, low building at the north end of the settlement, the kind of place that fed 30 men at a sitting on the cheap and never closed. She had worked the noon and evening shifts for 2 years. She had lived in a boarding house at the back of a wagon repair yard with 3 other women, 2 orc, 1 human, all of them working the same kind of shift somewhere else. She had saved. She had, in her 2nd year, moved out of the boarding house into a single room above a fabric shop with a small window that looked north toward the mountains she had come down from and thought about, but had not gone back to. She had met a human man named Kel Wren at the kitchen in the 3rd month of her 2nd year. He had been on a survey team laying out a new eastern line, and he had come in 3 times a week for a month, and had made a specific point of talking to her, and had done so without any of the awkwardness that human men who talk to orc women in Blackspire Junction usually carried. He had been kind. He had been funny. He had been well-spoken. He had also been, though she did not know it then, a man who had learned very early in his life that being kind and funny and well-spoken to any woman he wanted for a season was a lower cost than being honest, and had made the calculation many times, and had gotten quite good at hiding it. They had been together for 6 months. She had believed him. He had said the words a woman raised in an orkhold understood as intention, and had said them at the specific times a woman raised in an orkhold understood as intent. He had told her his family in the East would be difficult about her, but would come around, because his mother had come around to harder things than a green-skinned daughter-in-law, and had never regretted the coming around. He had told her he wanted a family. He had told her he wanted it soon. When she had told him she was carrying his child, in the 12th week, he had been quiet for 2 days. He had come back to her on the 3rd day and had said, plainly, that he had been offered a 2-year contract on a new coastal survey and needed to take it, and that he would come back for her and the child once the 1st year was up and he had a house arranged, and that she should stay at the boarding house above the fabric shop, and he would send money each month until he could come for them. She had believed him, barely, but she had. He had sent money twice. In the 5th month. In the 7th month. The letters had grown shorter. In the 8th month, he had written that the survey was extending further west than had originally been planned, and that he did not know when he would be able to come. Rue was born in the middle of the 9th month. Yenra had written to him 10 days after Rue was born. She had told him that his daughter was healthy, and that she had red dark hair, and that she was going to look, Yenra thought, more like her father than her mother, though the green undertone would deepen. She had signed the letter with the name of the boarding house and the fabric shop, so that he would know exactly where to write back to. He had not written back. She had waited 3 months. In the 4th month after Rue's birth, the kitchen where she had worked for 2 years had closed. Its owner, a middle-aged widow named Mrs. Sarl, who had been kind to Yenra without ever being warm about it, had received an offer for the whole property from a rail company that was expanding the eastern yard, and had taken the offer and had gone east to live with her sister. The kitchen had shut on a Friday. Yenra had been out of work by Saturday morning. She had had $122 saved. She had had a 4-month-old baby who was going to need 6 months of full care and no work she could reasonably do while she was doing it. She had had a room above the fabric shop that had come to feel less like a room and more like a place where she was waiting for something that was not coming. She had made the decision on a Tuesday in the 10th month. She had spent one long evening at the kitchen table in the boarding house with the map of the basin that Kel had drawn for her once on the back of a menu 6 months earlier when he had been telling her about the country to the south. She had traced the route from Blackspire Junction down to Silverfoot Landing. 140 miles of stagecoach and wagon and, at the end, a walk of perhaps a day if the weather held. Her mother's cousin Halda had settled at Silverfoot Landing the season Yenra had come down to Blackspire, and had written her one letter in the 2nd month of the 12th year of the peace, saying that if Yenra ever needed a place, she had one at Halda's house, without asking Yenra to explain any reason for needing it. Yenra had booked the stagecoach on the Wednesday. She had left on the Friday. She had traveled 6 days by stagecoach and by wagon share and by short mail cart until she had run out of the money she was willing to spend on transport, at a crossroads 2 mornings east of Deepford, on a wagon that would carry her no further, because the wagon driver had a delivery to make north that would take him 3 days. She had gotten out. She had walked. She had walked one long day. She had walked the 2nd morning through a rain that had started small and grown, and grown, and grown, until it was the storm that Ronan Kade had driven the last 2 miles of his own road in to find her. She thought about all of this in the dark of the spare room at the Kade ranch, the 9th night after her arrival, with Rue asleep in the cradle in the front room and Ronan Kade asleep in the room across the hall, and she understood, without any drama about it, that the calculation that had brought her here had been the correct one, and that whatever was going to come of the calculation would come of it on its own timing. She also understood, without letting herself dwell on it, that she was not going to write to Kelren again. She was going to write, in the morning, to her mother's cousin Halda at Silverfoot Landing, and tell her that Yenra had arrived safely in the Ironmoor Basin, and that she and Rue had found a temporary place with a widowed rancher named Ronan Kade 20 miles east of Deepford, and that she would write again in a month when she had a better sense of what came next. She was going to sign the letter with the specific formal name she had used with Halda since she was 10, which was her full-grown name, and she was not going to apologize for anything in the letter, because she had not done anything to apologize for. She slept. The winter came in slow that year, the way the Ironmoor sometimes did after a wet 9th month. There were 3 warm weeks after the storm broke, in the 10th and 11th months, in which the road was dry and the sky was blue and the last of the aspen leaves came down and the yard was full of them. Ronan raked leaves. Yenra helped. Rue lay on a folded quilt on the porch and kicked and made noises at the leaves. The first hard freeze came in the last week of the 11th month. The pass would close within the fortnight. Ronan did not raise the question of the road again. Yenra did not either. On the day of the first hard freeze, Yenra was at the kitchen table cutting a pattern out of a bolt of dark wool Ronan had brought back from Deepford 3 days earlier, and Ronan came in from the barn and said, "Without preamble, you should keep the spare room. As your room. Not just for the winter. As yours." Yenra looked at him. "I mean it as it sounds," he said. "Not more, not less. The room is yours. Rue has the cradle. The house works this way. It has been working this way for a month. I would like it to continue working this way. Whether you decide to stay through the winter or through the year or through what comes after is your decision, but the room is yours from this hour forward." Yenra set the scissors down. "Thank you," she said. "I will keep the room." She did not say anything else. She did not need to. She picked the scissors back up and went on cutting the pattern. The winter that came in the last week of the 11th month settled in fast and stayed. The pass closed. The road to Deepford stayed passable, but only for a wagon that knew the ruts, which Ronan's did. He went in every second Friday. He brought back what they needed. He brought back mail. There was one letter for Yenra in the third week of the 12th month from Halda at Silverfoot Landing. Halda wrote in a clean, neat hand that she had received Yenra's letter and had wept over it in the good way, and had prayed nightly for Yenra and Rue and Mr. Kade, and would be waiting to hear whatever news Yenra chose to send whenever Yenra chose to send it, and would come to visit in the spring when the roads opened, if that suited, and if not would come whenever it suited, and would keep sending letters in the meantime. Yenra read the letter twice at the kitchen table and put it in the drawer of the small desk in the front room on the shelf above the ledger, and did not comment on it further. Ronan did not ask. He noticed, later, that she read it again on the Sunday afternoons of the 12th and 1st months, and did not remark on that either. Rue had a first tooth in the 1st month, and a second by the middle of it, sat up on her own by the 2nd month, and could stand holding on to the low bench by the fire by the end of the 3rd. Every one of these developments happened in the front room, most of them under the eye of a rancher who had learned in the middle of the 11th month, in the specific, quiet way he learned everything, that a very small person's opinion of him was worth working for, and had started working for it, in small ways, without saying so. He carried her out to the barn on cold, clear afternoons to look at the horses, and treated her strong opinions about them with the serious attention of a man who had decided this baby's views mattered. He built her a small wooden horse in the 4th month, at the workbench in the barn on a cold Tuesday, when Yenra thought he was mending harness, and set it on the shelf above the cradle without ceremony. Rue approved. Yenra saw the horse and looked at Ronan. He said, "I had wood left over." She said, "I saw the wood pile." There was not. He said, "All right." There was not. She said, "Thank you." Ronan noticed sometime in the 2nd month that he had stopped waking up in the specific empty way he had woken up in for 3 years. It was not a thing he could point to a morning about. He simply came out one Wednesday and stood at the porch step with his first cup of coffee, and understood, without any drama attached, that the shape of his mornings had reorganized itself around a house with people in it, and that he did not want them reorganized back. Mrs. Roswyn from Deepford drove out in the middle of the 1st month, in a small covered trap without announcement. Ronan saw the trap coming from the barn and set his tools down and went to meet her at the yard. Mrs. Roswyn was 53, human, wide of shoulder and short of patience, with dark gray hair pinned tight and the specific face of a woman who had seen most of what Deepford had to show her over 4 decades and had opinions about all of it. She swung down without help. "I have come to see the baby," Mrs. Roswyn said. Ronan looked at her. "All right," he said. She came in. Yenra rose from the chair by the fire with Rue on her hip. Mrs. Roswyn looked at Rue. Mrs. Roswyn's face did something Ronan had not seen it do in 10 years, which was to soften around the mouth. "She is beautiful," Mrs. Roswyn said. "Thank you," Yenra said. Mrs. Roswyn sat down at the kitchen table without being asked. She put a small basket on the table. She said, "I have brought bread. Also a small jar of the last honey from the fall extraction. The bread is not as good as yours will be by the 3rd month, because I understand from Edgar Holt that you have been putting the kitchen in order, and any woman who puts a kitchen in order is going to bake bread at some point. But the honey is good. My husband keeps bees, and one of the 2 things he does well is that." She looked at Yenra directly. "I have come," Mrs. Roswyn said, "so that you know one thing. When you come into Deepford, which you will need to at some point, you will come to my house first. You do not need to know where anyone else's house is, you need to know where mine is. It is the 3rd house, past the mercantile on the north side of the street, with a green door and a red rose bush by the porch, which is dead until April. But you will know it by the specific way I have not pulled it out despite my husband's opinions. You come to my house. You come with the baby. Whatever needs to happen after that, I will help you arrange. This is not charity. This is one woman telling another woman where the door is. Yenra sat down slowly. Thank you, she said. Mrs. Roswin nodded. She looked at Ronan. Your father-in-law came into town a week ago and told my husband over coffee that anyone who had a bad word to say about a Ronan Kade household was welcome to say it to his face. My husband told me. I told him if Edgar Holt was making that statement, he was making it because he meant it, and it was time for me to drive out. So here I am. Ronan Kade, your father would like this. Your father, if you remember, once told my husband that a man's ranch was measured by what the ranch had in it, not by what the ranch was worth. He said this at the Deepford Fair the year you were 16. I remember it because my husband quoted it at me for a month. Your ranch, from what I have seen in the last 5 minutes, is worth more today than it has been in 3 years. Ronan looked at Mrs. Roswin a moment. Thank you, he said. She stayed for coffee and made a plan with Yenra about which shopkeepers to see first, and added that Yenra should not judge Deepford entirely by its women, because the men in Deepford were less trouble on the whole, though they had less to say. She held Rue for 20 minutes without asking, and Rue, who had by then accepted Edgar Holt without visible reservation, extended the same acceptance to Mrs. Roswin within 3 minutes, which everyone noted and no one commented on. She left before dark. She stood on the porch with her cloak wrapped around her. I will not come out every week, Mrs. Roswin said. I have my own house to run. But I will come when it matters, and you will come to my house when you come to town. That is the arrangement. That is the arrangement, Yenra said. Mrs. Roswin nodded. She got into the trap. She drove. Yenra stood on the porch a moment after the trap was out of the yard. Ronan came out of the barn where he had gone to give the two of them the last of the afternoon. She meant every word of that too, Ronan said. I know, Yenra said. She sounded tired in the specific way of a person who had been given a great deal in a short time and needed a moment to absorb it. Ronan did not press. He went back to the barn. That evening at supper, Yenra said, quietly, at the table, I did not expect any of this. Ronan looked at her. I did not either, he said. It is not what I would have said 3 months ago. Would happen if I picked up a woman with a baby on the road. I would have said it would be complicated. I would have said the town would make it complicated for us in ways I would spend a year putting right. I would have said that the specific way our two people have gotten along in this basin since the second reading has never been simple, and I would have expected the complications to fall on you harder than on me, which would not have been fair, and which I would have been guilty about. Instead, he said, Edgar has come out and made his position clear, and Mrs. Roswin has come out and made hers, and I do not know why we have received this specific run of grace. But we have. And I will not question it out loud. Yenra looked at the table. There is one thing I have thought about, she said, since Mrs. Roswin left. When we go to Deepford together for the first time, and there is a woman on the boardwalk who does not think what Mrs. Roswin thinks, and says a word she thinks she has the right to say. What do we do? Ronan thought about it. We keep walking, he said. We do not stop. We do not answer her. We keep walking. She does not have the right to take a piece of our morning to make herself feel better. Mrs. Roswin will hear about it by dinner, and she will do whatever needs doing on our behalf, and we will not have to do it ourselves. That is the arrangement Mrs. Roswin has made with us, without saying so. Yenra nodded slowly. All right, she said. That is what we do. Ronan looked at her a long moment. I said we, he said. You did, she said. I meant it. I know you did. Neither of them said anything more about it that night, but she said it back to him twice that week in small ways. On the Tuesday, at supper, she said, "We are low on salt." On the Thursday, at the kitchen door, she said, "We will need more feed before the second month." He heard the word each time. She meant it each time. He filed it, the way he was filing most things now. The winter went on. There was one bad stretch in the second week of the second month when Rue caught a small fever in the way babies did with no warning, and Yenra sat up with her 3 nights in a row, and Ronan sat up with them the third night without being asked, in the chair by the fire, so that Yenra could sleep for 2 hours in shifts. The fever broke on the 4th morning. Rue slept 14 hours after. Yenra slept 10. Ronan slept 6 and got up and did the barn chores and made oatmeal and did not say anything about the 3 nights, because there was nothing to say. The pass opened in the last week of the 3rd month, 10 days early. The road down to Deepford was passable by the 1st week of April. They went into town together on the 2nd Saturday of April, the 3 of them in the wagon on a supply run they had been planning for a fortnight. Ronan drove. Yenra sat beside him. Rue sat in the woven wrap against Yenra's chest, alert and attentive, watching the road come toward her. They went first to Mrs. Roswyn's house. Mrs. Roswyn opened the door before they knocked. She looked at Rue. Rue looked back at her. Rue reached with one hand. "Come in, Mrs. Roswyn said. All 3 of you." They went in. Mrs. Roswyn's husband was a small, quiet man of about 60 with kind eyes and rough farmer's hands, who had been introduced to babies before and did not fuss over them and was not fussed at in return. Rue looked at him for a full minute, decided he was acceptable, and turned her attention to a small tin cup on the table, which he gave her without asking, and which Rue examined with the philosophical seriousness of a child determining whether a cup could be improved by biting. They stayed an hour. Mrs. Roswyn told Yenra which 2 of the Deepford shopkeepers to see first and which to see later. Mrs. Roswyn walked out with them when they left, in the middle of the boardwalk, in the middle of a Saturday morning when half of Deepford was on the street, and stood on the boardwalk in front of the mercantile with her arm through Yenra's and her free hand resting on Rue's small foot, and did not move until every woman on that boardwalk had walked past them, and had seen exactly what Mrs. Roswyn wished them to see. There were 4 women. 2 of them nodded pleasantly. One of them looked and did not speak. One of them, in a dark green dress, opened her mouth to say something, and then, on catching Mrs. Roswyn's eye, closed it again. Mrs. Roswyn's arrangement, as it turned out, was thorough. Ronan and Yenra bought what they had come for. They stopped at Mara Blackwell's fabric shop, 4 doors down from the mercantile, because Ronan had told Yenra she would like Mara, and she did, and they spent a long 30 minutes there. They ate their midday meal in the small kitchen of the mercantile with the mercantile owner's wife, who was one of the 2 Mrs. Roswyn had told Yenra to see first, and who had the specific quiet welcome of a woman who understood that a first visit was a serious thing and would not squander it. They drove home in the early afternoon. Yenra was quiet on the road. Ronan let her be quiet. Rue slept. Halfway home, Yenra said, she held my arm the whole way down the boardwalk. I saw, Ronan said. Yenra did not say anything else. She looked out at the fields going by. She reached over at one point and put her hand briefly on Ronan's forearm on the wagon rein and took it back. He did not comment on that either. He drove. He asked her to marry him 3 weeks later, on a mild evening in the last week of April, on the porch, without ceremony, in the specific way he had learned to say important things. He said, quietly, from the second step where he had sat the night of the cradle conversation, "You and Rue are the reason this house is a house again. I would like it to be your house too. Not by arrangement, by your choosing. I would like to marry you." Yenra was quiet a long moment. "I have thought about you asking me that," she said, "since the second month. I told myself I would say yes." He looked up at her. "And now that I have asked." "Yes," she said. They were married in the Deepford Church in the third Saturday of May. It was a small ceremony. Edgar Holt walked her down the aisle. He had asked to. She had asked him to. Neither of them had needed to explain to the other why. Mrs. Roswyn sat in the second row and cried into a handkerchief without pretending she was not. Mara Blackwell had come from Garrow Wells for the day and sat in the fourth row with the specific composed satisfaction of a woman who had made a friend of Yenra over 3 visits at her shop and had known this day was coming since the second. Halda had come from Silverfoot Landing, 4 days on the road, and sat in the front row with Rue in her lap through the whole ceremony. Rue was 10 months old and had opinions about the specific way the Reverend was speaking, and communicated them once, loudly, in the middle of the vows, which Halda covered gracefully by pretending Rue had merely coughed, though everyone in the church had heard it, and Ronan had smiled without meaning to for the first time at his own wedding. Yenra wore a dark blue dress she had sewn herself, in the same color as the wool dress she had been wearing on the road the night Ronan had picked her up in the rain. She had told him about this choice the night before. He had said, "That is the correct color." They rode home late in the afternoon. The Ironmoor spring was around them, green and enormous and beginning. The rest of that spring and the summer that came after settled into what Ronan had, without naming it, been building toward since the 9th day on the porch. Yenra kept the accounts. Ronan worked the outer fields. Rue walked properly by the 7th month of her 2nd year and had views about the horses that she now communicated in the beginnings of language, and had staked out the small wooden horse on the shelf as her particular possession, and carried it with her from room to room, and had named it on a Sunday morning in September with the specific pronouncement of a small person who had been thinking about it, Horsey. Ronan told Yenra later that this was, from a 2-year-old, roughly the correct name. The first frost came in the last week of the 11th month. Yenra sat at the kitchen table one evening in the 2nd week of November with the ledger open in front of her and Rue asleep in the small room off the kitchen that had become her own room in the summer. She looked up. Ronan was in the chair by the fire, reading. He had not turned a page in 10 minutes. She watched him a moment. He looked up. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. She went back to the ledger. Then, "Ronan," she said. Yes, she looked at the table. She looked at him. "If it is a boy," she said. He went very still. He looked at her with the specific direct eyes that had been direct since a rainy road in the 10th month. He set the book down. He looked at the fire. He looked at the cradle in the corner of the front room, visible through the open door, where Rue had slept her first Ironmoor winter, and where the small wooden horse now sat waiting for whichever child needed it next. "Wynn," he said. "Not because he would replace anyone," Yenra said, quietly, "because the name still belongs in this house." Ronan held her gaze for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "it does." She went back to the ledger. He picked up his book. The fire was warm. Outside, the Ironmoor 11th month was cold and enormous and settling. The house was exactly the correct size. The name Wynn was in the room with them, no longer only the weight of what was lost, but also the shape of what was coming. And that, the house and the ranch and the accounts and the fire and Rue asleep in the next room and Wynn on his way, was exactly and completely right. Ronan Kade had once believed the cradle in the corner of his front room was proof of everything the house had lost. That winter, when Rue slept in it, and Yenra's account book lay open beside his coffee, he understood that it had also been waiting. That is the whole of it. A man who stopped for a woman on a road in the rain because his father had told him to stop. A woman who asked only for a barn and found something she had not known she was looking for. A baby who assessed each new person she met with the specific serious attention of someone for whom all arrivals were equally significant, and reached her conclusions without apology, and shared them without hesitation, and had never been wrong yet. Some storms do not arrive to destroy. Some arrive to deliver. Before we close, one small question. If this story sat with you tonight, tell me in the comments. When has a stranger stopped for you on a road you had no plan for? Not the big rescue, the small stop, the hand held out in a rain you were pretending was not falling. I read every comment. I read them the way Ronan sat on that porch step the 9th day and told Yenra about a cradle in a corner. Slowly, more than once. Aware that a whole life is behind each of them. And if you have not already, subscribe. Turn on the bell. Stay a while. The hearth here always keeps a cup for you.